Today's lecture, I'm going to talk about the Pampas of Argentina. I will include a little bit on Buenos Aires and on Montevideo right at the end. Just a quick brief on Argentina. Settlement in Argentina came from Peru. The Viceroyalty of Peru included Argentina, and the settlers came from highland Peru, or Alta Peru, what is today Bolivia, and came into northwestern Argentina to basically raise crops and food and animals for highland Bolivia. There was a big silver mine up there, Potosi, and they needed food, and so they moved down into what is today Argentina to settle and provide food for highland areas. There were a series of Jesuit missions. On some of the voyages, I do have a lecture on the Jesuit missions. We're going to skip that one here. Actually, I gave it last week for the voyage coming from Lisbon. But they were mainly big farms that were raising crops, particularly sugarcane, wheat, and raising cattle, horses, and mules to take up to highland Bolivia. The city of Buenos Aires was founded in 1536, but the local Indians resisted and attacked it, and it was abandoned after just a couple of years, and it was refounded in 1580. But we have the Rio de la Plata that we'll be sailing into tonight, and heading to Buenos Aires. They could not, excuse me, they could not ship things out through the Rio de la Plata. If you were living in Buenos Aires in the 1600s and early 1700s, you put an order in for something. Let's say you needed a new pistol or something from Spain. It went from Buenos Aires to the northwestern settlements, Cordoba, Mendoza, or up to Tucumán, then to highland Bolivia, and then all the way to Lima, and then your order went from Lima to Panama, and from Panama across to the Caribbean, and then on to Spain. And maybe a year or so later, your shipment would come back to Panama, to Lima, to highland Bolivia, down into Argentina. So it was really, really complicated and very, very slow. It wasn't until 1776 that the Viceroyalty de la Plata was set up, and so that Buenos Aires could become a port and ship things in and out. Now, obviously, during that whole time, there were smugglers coming from Brazil that were shipping things in, or even directly from Europe, not from Spain, but from the Dutch and the French and the English were shipping things in, smuggling stuff into Buenos Aires. This is a map from the early years, about 1600, and again, at the upper left-hand corner is highland Peru, Alta Peru, modern Bolivia. You can see Lake Titicaca up there, and we're talking now about the bottom right corner of this map, the area around the Rio de la Plata area. I want to talk about the Pampas. So there's Argentina. You can see where Buenos Aires is. The yellow is the portion of Argentina that is the Pampas. It does also include Uruguay, as we'll see in a minute. So on that map, you can see the Pampas. It is colored a little bit differently for Uruguay and for Argentina, but it's a circular area centered on the Rio de la Plata area, Rio de la Plata estuary. The Pampas are a flat grasslands, naturally. There are very few rivers crossing the Pampas, except two large rivers coming in from the north. On the east side, Uruguay River, and just to the west, the Paraná River. The southern limits of the Pampas are the Colorado River, but everything to the north of the Colorado River to around Buenos Aires, and then including much of Uruguay, is this region of the Pampas. Soils are very good. Rainfall is better to the northern part of the Pampas and less to the southern part of the Pampas, and extends all the way off to the Andes Mountains to the west. So again, there, the area in the lighter green is our Pampas region, much of the area around Buenos Aires in Argentina, and then much of Uruguay. In Argentina, there are very few physical features on the Pampas. In most of the pictures that I'm going to show you, it just looks like a flat area. Any of you who live in Kansas or Nebraska, it looks just like Kansas or Nebraska. There's a set of mountains to the west. There's a town there, a city there in the northwest, the upper left-hand corner, Cordoba. There's a range of hills just on the west side of Cordoba. And south of Buenos Aires, there's a town or city, Tandil, and around Tandil, there's a series of highlands, but really not even mountains. When the Spanish first came to this area, horses and cattle got loose, and within a few years, there were herds of wild horses and wild animals on the Pampas. Prior to the arrival of the Europeans, there were very few people living on the Pampas for several different reasons. The most important was there wasn't much water. There were very few rivers, there wasn't much standing water to drink. But also the animals on the Pampas were in general tough to hunt. Two animals in particular, the guanaco, the wild relative of the llama, and the rhea, which is an ostrich-like animal. And I'll show you lots of pictures of both of those on my next lecture. Those were hard to hunt, and so the Indians really didn't have many people living out there. As soon as the Indians got horses, then the population grew very quickly, and you had lots of Indians out on the Pampas hunting not only the guanaco and the rhea, but also obviously the cattle. The Spanish had wagon trains going from the northwestern area of what is now Argentina, around Tucumán and Salta and Mendoza and Cordoba, and they would be crossing the plains. The Indians attacked them, just like what you see in the movies of the Indians attacking the wagon trains going across the American Great Plains. I haven't been able to find a lot of pictures of the Indians in Argentina. This is the only one I found. It's an old postcard. On this drawing here, Indian on horseback. Those are guanaco on the upper right-hand corner there, and they were using a weapon called the bola to go after these animals. They'd used the bolas for many years. I mean, literally thousands of years. The people out in this region had used the bola. It's a typical weapon. You entwine the animal's legs with the bola. Here's a drawing, a picture of the Indians attacking one of the wagon trains. And here's one of the wagon trains crossing the plains. Something I want to point out in this drawing that'll be important in a minute, notice how the oxen are hooked up to the wagon. One pair of oxen are right close to the wagon. They're tied to a tongue, a piece of wood coming out from the wagon. The other oxen in these drawings are well ahead. They're out on a lead rope way away, and you'll see why that is important in a minute. Here again, the wagon, big wheels, very high off the ground, and usually oxen pulling them. Here with horses pulling them. But that's the typical wagon, is one pair of wheels. It wasn't like the Conestoga wagon that we had in the American Great Plains. This is the typical Argentine Pampas wagon. And here again, people settling down probably for the night with their wagons. Notice the one pair of oxen way ahead of the wagon. This is a 1928 video. And here comes the wagon with the other oxen. There you see the one pair in front with a rope helping to pull the other pair of oxen and the wagon up. There are very few rivers out on the Pampas, and what rivers they did have were deeply entrenched. Here they're trying to get the first two oxen up onto the ground surface. then they helped to pull the wagon up with the other 2 oxen. And then they head off into the sunset. Within about a century after the arrival of the Europeans into this area, there were mixed blood people, European, local Indian, who were out on the Pampas hunting the wild cattle. And they were called gauchos. Again, these are the mixed blood people. They worked on large estancias or large haciendas, large farms, and the product was basically the hides from the cattle. They weren't even doing anything with the meat. The quality was very, very low. And today in Argentina, even though the gauchos were a very, very small percentage of the population ever living in Argentina, there is a tremendous emphasis culturally on the gauchos. There's this gaucho tradition that still is very important for Argentina, as well as Uruguay. And even if you saw the video of the lecture yesterday, the Huasos are the gauchos of Chile. So here's a gaucho going after an animal with his bolas, spinning it around his head and trying to entwine this around the legs of the animal so that they could capture the animal here with cattle, probably just for branding purposes. The gauchos wear a distinctive costume still today. This is very important in Argentina. You usually see them on horseback. This guy has his bolas around his waist. And I think this is a photo from the late 1800s of a gaucho. And here again, this one is from the late 1800s. I found these on the web. I really like this next picture. There is our big wagon. There's over on the bottom right-hand corner, that's a side of meat that is roasting over a fire. And I'm not sure exactly which tours you people will be going on, but if you're going on one of the ones that is going out either in Buenos Aires or I think in Uruguay, there's some shore excursions that go out to see the gauchos, or if you're on one at Chacabuco in Chile, I know there's one tour there that goes out and where you get the meat that has been cooked over a fire like that. There's 3 people in this picture. I like the guy that's sitting on the tongue of the wagon. He's strumming his guitar and smoking his cigarette. The other 2 guys are doing something that, again, is very important in the cultural history of Argentina and still today. What they are doing is drinking mate. The guy in the middle has a mate cup, a gourd, frequently covered with leather. He has probably a silver straw, and he is drinking mate. The other guy holds a thermos of hot water that he'll be pouring into the cup to make the drink. So here's an old guy drinking his mate. It's yerba mate. It's a plant that is indigenous to Paraguay and Uruguay and Argentina. It's been domesticated. They now grow it as a small shrub, and you can go into the supermarkets and buy your bags of mate. So all of these guys are drinking mate. There you can see the cup with leather covering a gourd, his silver straw. The way in which you do this is you fill the cup with this, let's call it like tea leaves. It's ground up leaves of the mate plant, yerba mate plant. You fill up the cup. You shake it in a certain way so that the finer leaves are to the top and the coarser ones are at the bottom. You pour in some water, cool water, not really hot water, and then after you got it soaked a little bit, then you pour in some hot water and you take a couple sips. And then you pour in some more hot water and pass the cup and straw to the next person, and that person drinks a couple drinks and then pours in some more hot water and passes it around to the next person. It's something that's social. People do it in groups. You will probably see some people somewhere along the line in the next couple days drinking yerba mate. If you are traveling in Argentina on a bus or in a car out on the freeway or whatever, and You stop. You can refill your thermos. It's not boiling water. It's hot water, somewhere around 160, 170 degrees. If it's boiling water, it would damage the leaves. But you can actually stop at the gas stations or the rest areas on the highway, and there will be a place where you can get hot water to make your yerba mate. There's my wife at one of these gas stations with a hot water dispenser. These are gauchos, typical gauchos branding cattle. And I've got two pictures here. These are supposed to be, I got these on the web, they're late 1800s, and these are the houses of the gauchos. Fairly crude, probably what we call wattle and daub, just mud plastered over a stick framework, thatched roof. Now, in the middle 1800s, beginning in the 1840s, 1850s, but particularly around the 1860s, things changed out on the Pampas radically. First of all, transportation got better. There were a series of railroads extending out from Buenos Aires in all directions onto the Pampas. One very important thing that came in from the United States was barbed wire. With barbed wire, all you need were a few small sticks to hold up the wire, and you could begin to control the breeding of cattle, which had not been done before. So all of a sudden, cattle breeding becomes important. New livestock were brought in from Europe, and the quality of Argentine beef improved radically. Today, if you go and have dinner tomorrow in Buenos Aires, you will find that the Argentine beef is among the best in the world. They found new ways to dig wells, machines that would dig deep wells, and also new types of pumps. So if you're out on the Pampas and you don't have any source of water, there is water down below. You simply have to get at it. And that technology comes in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. And there's also new weapons to go after the few remaining Indians. There was actually campaigns to eliminate the Indian population out on the Pampas in the middle 1800s, later 1800s, just as there was in the American Great Plains. In fact, these inventions and these new technologies that we're talking about here took place on the American Great Plains at the same time as in Argentina. So it's the same sort of situation. The last thing is refrigerator ships come in 1877, so chilled beef can be taken to Europe. And at that point in time, much of Europe was industrializing. They needed food for the people in the cities. And with the advent of refrigerator ships, they could send processed meat to Europe. Also, large numbers of European immigrants, particularly from Southern Europe, especially Italians. Some people suggest that 60 to 70% of the Argentine population today has Italian ancestry, but also people from Spain, and then Germans and European, or English and so forth. The English built the railroads. The Germans were in the meat processing, packing industry, and you get lots and lots of Europeans coming in. This map illustrates the frontier in the Pampas, starting in the late 1700s around Buenos Aires, and you can just look at the dates there, and you see that over a period of time, the agricultural frontier in the Pampas region just expanded, and this map is only going to the southwest. The same sort of thing was going on to the northwest up towards what is today Paraguay, and obviously in Uruguay the same sort of thing was going on. This map may not be real visible to those of you in the back, but I think you can kind of get the sense here. This is from 1869, and it's the railroads from Buenos Aires. You can see where Buenos Aires there is in the lower right, and you see a couple of black lines going out from Buenos Aires. There's also a line in the upper part of the map from Rosario out to Cordoba. This is 1899, and again, it doesn't show up real well, but I think you can see that there's a lot more railroads by that time crossing the Pampas. And here, this one is 1911, and there were even more railroads by that time. Today, the major highways in Argentina basically follow the same routes as the railroads, because it was the railroads that established the towns out on the Pampas. This is a photo I found on the web, supposedly from the late 1800s. People gathering probably hay. Here harvesting wheat. Again, it's a 1928 video. there with some tractors. The first part of this had horses, and then horse-drawn wagons picking up the probably alfalfa. And again, this would probably be alfalfa. Here, a small town out in the Pampas area. I've been going to Argentina since 1970, January of 1970. That year, we were only up in the far northwest, in Tucumán and Salta and Jujuy, far northwestern area. But since then I've gone many, many times to, usually to Buenos Aires, and then gone from there, take a rental car in all directions. What I've got now is just a series of photos from all around the Pampas region that I've taken. This is from south of Buenos Aires near Tandil with sunflowers. You get a variety of crops, sunflowers, flax, wheat, variety of things. The field of wheat. Here, hay. But just notice a couple things. One, not very many trees. Where you do find trees, they've been planted relatively recently, in the last 100 years or so. There originally were very few trees. So you get typical scenes like this where stretching out to the horizon, you don't see much in the way of trees, and the only place you'll see trees is where there's a house. Notice the windmill, again, that technology that came in the late 1800s for drilling wells and getting water to the surface. Lots of cattle. This is off towards the west, getting towards the Andes Mountains. And there you get the Andes Mountains in the far distance, or here, Andes in the far distance. One time in 1985, I drove along parallel to the Andes on what they called Highway 40, I think. We went 600 miles in 3 days, dirt road the entire way. More cattle there. And again, notice the trees. They're trees that have been planted relatively recently, and typically you'll find them around a small farmstead. This time of year, December and January, kind of the middle of summer, one of the things that you'll see a lot of, particularly in the area south of Buenos Aires, will be large mechanical harvesters. And these are guys that are operating, many of the farms do not have their own equipment, at least the big harvesters, expensive harvesters. And so what they'll do is they'll contract with somebody to come in and harvest their wheat or harvest their sunflowers or whatever. So on the highways, you'll be driving around and you see lots and lots of these big heavy equipment convoys going from one farm to the next. They really slow you down if you're trying to make time driving. And then you'll also see them parked on the side of the road in the late afternoon. They set up camp. So these are very, very typical. A lot of times in the center of the freeways, in the freeway interchanges, you'll see people camped. The other thing that you'll see a lot of is that virtually every large farm will have its own storage tanks for whatever thing that they're harvesting. And so you see lots and lots of these things. I had to include one sunset picture to remind myself that we're now finished talking about the agricultural area out on the Pampas, and let's go to Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is there on the western end of the Rio de la Plata estuary, just a few miles to the west of Buenos Aires. There's an area called the Tigre Delta, which is the delta for the Paraná and the Uruguay river systems. There usually are some tours that go out there. It's kind of an interesting area to go out and ride a boat around the Delta area. Most of the transport today, roads, freeways, railroads, and so forth, all focuses in on Buenos Aires. A little bit closer view. Having been a professor for 41 years, I've got to teach you some terms and so forth. We use the term primate city to refer to a place that is the absolute dominant city in a country. A geographer by the name of Mark Jefferson came up with this concept, wrote a paper on it, 1939. Other scholars have talked about primate cities and looked at the characteristics. It's usually at least twice as large as the next biggest city in the country. It's usually the capital city. It's usually the economic center, the political center, the cultural center of the country, and it's almost always the transportation hub. Buenos Aires is a classic example of a primate city. Most of you will be getting off in Santiago, and Santiago, Chile is a typical primate city. Lima, Peru, Paris, France, London, England. There are a few countries in South America that don't have the primate city. Ecuador, for example, Guayaquil is bigger than Quito up in the mountains. But most of the countries in South America have this. Brazil is another exception in that they set up a separate city as their capital in 1966, I think. Here's a Google Earth image of Buenos Aires. And this one is one done by radar, and the white areas, the whiter it is, the denser the settlement, the denser the construction of big buildings and so forth. A little bit closer view. And this is basically the downtown area that probably most of you will be seeing. Our ship will be docked just off the top of this screen. Up at the very top center is where we will be docked. The metropolitan area has a population of about 14 million people, but the CABA, the Ciudad Autónoma de Buenos Aires, has a population of a little bit less than 3 million. The CABA is the equivalent of the District of Columbia in the United States. It is the federal capital. It is not the capital of Buenos Aires province. That's La Plata, a few miles to the east. And more than half of the population of greater Buenos Aires does not live within the federal capital area. The official federal capital area is a little less than 80 square miles, or about 200 square kilometers, but the broad metropolitan area goes out about 1,800 square miles. If you've driven through Los Angeles, or those of you who went up to Sao Paulo, you know these things are just huge metropolitan areas, and Buenos Aires is typical of that. It represents about a third of the population of the country and about a third of the economic activity in the country, but there's something that people in Argentina frequently say. Everybody in Argentina lives in Buenos Aires, used to live in Buenos Aires, or wants to live in Buenos Aires. If you've ever flown into Buenos Aires, you probably flew into the airport Ezeiza. Ezeiza is the international airport. It's about 30 miles south of the city. Whenever I've gone into Buenos Aires as frequently as I can, I fly from Santiago, Chile. I have a lot of friends in Santiago, so I'll go down there, spend a couple days in Santiago, and then I fly from Santiago over to Buenos Aires. The advantage of doing that is that from Santiago or from Montevideo, from Paraguay, from the adjacent countries, you can fly into a small airport called Aeroparque, which is near downtown. It's also only 5 minutes from the cruise terminal. So when I've been getting on cruise ships here, I try to fly into Aeroparque. This is looking out the window of the plane just about to land at Aeroparque, and it's the far western suburbs of Buenos Aires. There's downtown Buenos Aires. The main avenue is called the 9th of July. It's named after their Independence Day, and it is one of the great wide boulevards of a city anywhere in the world. There's, again, 9th of July Avenue. The obelisk in the center dates to 1936. And the date 1936 is important in the history. That was the 400th anniversary of the first founding of the city in 1536. Just a few more years, they'll come up on the 500th anniversary. This is from one of the smaller streets leading into the obelisk. It's not the 9th of July. Here's some shots along the 9th of July. There are multiple lanes of traffic going each direction. I think there's 5 or 6 in a center, and then there are a couple on the side. I put the dates in here. I've been to Buenos Aires many times, but some of these are taken in 2008. And again, that's looking down from a hotel window on 9th of July. Any of you are from Argentina or Buenos Aires, you know right away those photos were older photos. This is 9th of July from January of this year. And the big new difference is that right down the middle of it, they've created express bus lanes and bus stops right down the middle. So this is a bus stop right down the center of the 9th of July Avenue. Lots and lots of big apartments, condos, and so forth all around the 9th of July. That photo actually was by the Congress, I think. But this is along the 9th of July. This is the Opera House. It's on the 9th of July Avenue. It's one of the famous opera houses anywhere in the world, one of the most important ones. Seats about 2,500 people. And the best of my knowledge, it will not be open tomorrow, but we can always check at the reception desk. There should be somebody there who can tell you it may be open. It's only open a couple days a week for visitors. This is down towards some of the shopping areas, and this is a street called Florida. It's a pedestrian area. In the Currents this morning, there was a statement that said something like, there may be a shuttle bus. We don't know for sure, but there may be a shuttle bus that will take you from the cruise terminal down to a mall on Florida Street. Incidentally, this is a port where we will be docked fair ways away from the cruise terminal. So there will be buses that will go from the gangway to the cruise terminal, and then if you're on a shore excursion, those will probably be on the outside of the cruise terminal, or you can walk to downtown from the cruise terminal. This is all on La Florida Street, the pedestrian walking area. I want to point out just a couple of buildings that are in the downtown area. The Casa Rodada is the presidential palace, and it is located right there. And the Congress building is at the opposite end of the same street that is right there. You can also see the one that goes from the top to the bottom of the image there. That's the 9th of July, the big wide one that has the obelisk right in the center where the two streets cross. This is the Casa Rosada presidential palace. The plaza was under construction when I was here in January and again when I was here in March. So I'm not sure whether the view is going to be real good of this. There were a lot of construction barriers that were up in January and March. But this is the famous balconies that Evita gave her speeches on and so forth. There's Evita, and there's Evita doing her thing up on the balconies. There is a museum inside the presidential palace, and it's open only, I think, 1 or 2 days a week. I have been inside. I've actually sat at the desk where the president supposedly does his thing, but could not take any pictures inside. This is the Plaza de Mayo, which is right in front of the Casa Rosada. And I've taken these pictures off the web. After the Falkland Islands War and when the military government fell, and while they were still in military was in power, the dictatorship was in power, women who lost either husbands or children or grandchildren were protesting. They called them the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, and they always wore their white kerchiefs and stood outside the palace as just a silent protest. Today you'll see people protesting out there. Some of the mothers are still there, but you're more likely to see people protesting labor laws, or the bank accounts were seized, or whatever. There's always people out protesting on this plaza. Also on the same plaza is the National Cathedral, there on the right, the one with all the Greek columns out front. San Martin, the liberator of Argentina, is buried inside there, and it's always nice to go into that one. This is the Congress building, which is at the other end of the avenue. There's a little bit closer view, and there's there's a park out in front of it. Buenos Aires has lots of parks. It is a quite green city as you get away from the downtown area. Many of your tour buses will probably go past this. This is called the Tulip. It's a metal sculpture that actually, like a tulip, opens and closes. In the morning it opens, and at night it closes up just like a tulip. And I think many of the tours will probably go to Recoleta Cemetery, one of the old cemeteries. Recoleta really means an enclosed or restricted monastery, there was one located here, but it became a cemetery area. And the various tombs are absolutely wonderful to look at, nice sculptures and so forth. The most famous one is this one, which is the family Duarte, and the daughter of that family was Evita, and so she's buried here. One other neighborhood that's important is the neighborhood called La Boca, and La Boca means simply the mouth. It's the mouth of the small stream, and at that mouth of that stream is where the city of Buenos Aires was originally founded. There's a little bit closer view. The stream there is the bottom right-hand corner. The other thing that really shows up in this photo is a large soccer stadium, La Bombonera. And this is the home of Boca Juniors, one of the two great Buenos Aires teams. The other one is River Plate, which stadium is located some distance away. But I took these photos off the web. Here's the inside of La Boca. The yellow and blue you're going to see all over if you go to La Boca area. That's the River Stadium, the River Plate Stadium. I threw in just so if there's any River Plate fans instead of Boca Junior fans. But all around the stadium there are stores selling T-shirts and all sorts of stuff. I have a son that's a Boca fan, so I always have to stop and get him things in this area. This is the independent Republic of La Boca. It's really an Italian area. It was a poor area for many, many years. There's a lot of shops out on the street and things to do. It's fairly safe to walk in as long as you stay in the area that the tourist guides tell you to. Don't go wandering off a couple blocks away from the main tourist area. But it's quite scenic. There are a number of restaurants. If you're there at lunchtime, you can eat out on the street, little restaurants like that. And many of them will have a tango show, like that or like that. One last thing, there's the Casa Rodada. At the very top of the screen, that brownish area, water, is the old port. It's no longer used at the port. The port where we'll be stopping at is a little to the northwest. But they have redeveloped the downtown port area right behind the Casa Rosada as an area called Puerto Madero. And Puerto Madero has lots of new big buildings. This is some of the port buildings that have been turned into, the warehouses have been turned into offices. But lots of new construction out there. There are a bunch of very fancy five-star hotels in Madeira. That's the Hilton there in the center. And there's also yachts using what used to be the port facilities like that. We've just got a couple minutes left, and I'll kind of fly through this. I don't have time to do both Montevideo and Punta del Este, but thought I'd show you a little bit of Montevideo. It's the southernmost capital city in the Western Hemisphere. You might think, no, Buenos Aires is farther south. Look at a map and you will notice that both Santiago and Buenos Aires, they're roughly the same latitude as Montevideo, but Montevideo is in fact a little bit farther south. Has a population of about 1.4 million. A metro area is over 2 million, and the whole country has about 3.4 million. So about half the people of Uruguay live in Montevideo. It has a wonderfully good harbor, better harbor than Buenos Aires, and a number of reports that I've seen suggest that the quality of life in Montevideo is the highest in Latin America. It is a pretty safe city. It's very easy to walk through. It's located right there, and if you take your eye along the bottom of the screen to the left, it would be some distance across the Rio de la Plata estuary where you'd find Buenos Aires. This was settled first by the Portuguese, and then they tried to build a fort here. The Spanish on the other side of the Rio de la Plata came over, attacked them, kicked them out. So the city dates to 1724. The earlier settlement was called Sacramento, and some of you may be doing a shore excursion in Uruguay out to Sacramento. That's a real neat shore excursion. I did that one in March. British occupied it for a short period of time. There was an uprising. They rebelled. They kicked out the Portuguese, and the Spanish governor finally fled, kicked them out, and then there was a period of time for about 30 years when the groups in Uruguay, basically the liberals and the conservatives, fought each other. They had two original leaders that had kicked out the Brazilians, but they fought for a long, long time, and still today there are political divisions in Uruguay, although in general it is one of the more democratic countries in South America. The current president is an interesting guy. He's a surgeon and doesn't live in the National Palace. He chooses to live in the house where he always has lived and so forth. Very democratic guy. It had the same period of expansion and the same history as what the Argentine Pampas area went through. That is to say, the arrival of refrigerator ships, ways to dig deep wells, barbed wire and so forth, transportation improvements with railroads and so forth, led to the development of Uruguay. There's a Google Earth image of the city, and a little bit closer view. We will be docked right there. And there's a little bit closer view. Our dock is going to be right there. And if you're watching this on TV, Channel 9, you're not going to see what I'm going to do, but I'm going to point out a couple of things. We will probably be either here or there. We will have to walk out. This building here is kind of the control area, the administration building for the port. So we'll come out past that, and then we can walk. And in particular, you might want to walk up to Plaza Independencia. It's only about 10 or 12 blocks away. If you're not doing a shore excursion, that's an easy one to walk to. It's a very safe neighborhood. This is a view that I took off the web. And again, our dock is right there. And so what you would be doing is walking in this historic neighborhood towards Plaza Independencia, which is located right there. The tower here on the bottom left is the telecommunications tower. You'll see it, it's one of the higher buildings. That tower there in the distance is by the Plaza Independencia. That one right in the center, the one with the little turrets on it, this is a building on Plaza Independencia. So that's your reference if you're headed off in that direction. There's the telecommunications tower. Another view of it. This is, as you come out of the port area, you cross the street, there is a large market, and there are some restaurants inside. There are restaurants out on the street. You can walk past those. That's the market there on the right-hand side. And if you want wonderful Uruguayan beef, this is the place to go. A lot of different little small restaurants. They're not very expensive. Barbecue area. If you continue further, you'll be walking on some pedestrian streets. This is called the Plaza Constitucion, I think, and that building in the background is the National Cathedral. There's the inside of it. In that little plaza, there is a wonderful fountain, and usually when cruise ships are in port, there are people around that fountain selling all sorts of local things, antiques and so forth, out on the plaza. This is on the Plaza Constitucion, or Plaza Independencia. That's the one tower that stands out. There are several government buildings on this plaza, and there is a monument to the guy who was the leader of the group that defeated the Brazilians and led to the country's independencia, Artigas. And there he is. That's the National Congress building, which is located some distance away. You might be on a tour where you'll see this. This is a monument dedicated to the early settlers with the same kind of wagon that we saw in those videos on the Pampas. And all along the shore, away from the port area, are apartments. This is one I found on the web from night. And there is our sign for Montevideo. And that's the sign that I should tell you that my next lecture is going to be on Sunday. And what I'll be doing then is talking about Patagonian wildlife. We'll start to move our way south. If you have any questions, again, I'll be in the back. Zumba should be starting in here in just a minute or two. Thanks a lot.